One, I need to make a little presentation on the topic to frame the issues that we'll be deliberating, and just assign another role of moderating the session too. So I was thinking that some moderator would be asking me some question, and I'll be feeling a little glorified responding to these questions, but that is gone. Irfan Muzaffar is, I believe, a little unwell, so he could not join today. So the last session focuses on data design in politics, which is a little tricky when it comes to politics, since we have used the word politics at the end of the statement, meaning thereby perhaps it is multiplying with data, design, and decisions all. So let's consider it as a multiplying factor with all the three categories. We have been learning a lot during the last 2 days about systems, data issues, their impact, and other stuff. So I have benefited my talk from these conversations during the last 2 days. And for the panelists, what I want to do is only throw certain questions for you and benefit from your experience as you have been thickly involved with the public's policy delivery, and see that how you really attend these questions and what kind of future agenda can emerge out of that. So with very broad 3 overarching issues that I intend to discuss today. Pehli baat, children or bacche. Bacche, let's make a difference between 2 categories, like children and students. What's the difference? We all know that. So in terms of number, let me throw some bigger numbers for you to reflect on. Bigger number is age group 5 to 16. We have around 65 million students, children in Pakistan. And out of these 65 million kids, around 30% are out of school. So this is one number I would like you to keep in mind while we reflect in more details on these issues. And the student body that we have, if we divide them into 2 categories, we have 61% in public schools and 39% in private sector. And we all know that this number is going higher day by day. So these 2 numbers are very important for me to reflect on one very central overarching question for all of us as practitioners of education service delivery. Why these numbers are important? They challenge the agency of all of us perhaps in one way or the other. So what kind of agency we command to talk around education and all that? I understand that my friends from the civil services have an agency being a civil servant and taking care of education. Minister Sahab has an agency and a responsibility कि आप एजुकेशन में क्या कर सकते हैं, और आपको लोगों ने अगर मैंडेट दिया है तो मिनिस्टर साहब उसमें क्या करेंगे, इनकी एजेंसी है. What is other agencies available? As a consultant, yeah, it's a livelihood. As a parent, yes. So I think the question of agency to attend education reforms is very central to the discourse and making our dispositions clear that who we are. Am I talking as a parent of a kid? Am I talking as an expert, hired consultant for something, or I'm a politician and people have given me mandate कि जी आप assembly में जाएं और हमारे बच्चों के लिए कुछ करें, और वसीम साहब, फरीद साहब, इत्शाम साहब के इनके ज़िम्मे काम है. तो मेरा ख्याल है कि जो फाइनर लाइंस हैं अपनी एजेंसी की, अपनी jurisdiction की, in order to design reforms is very important, and that has implication for the political economy of reforms. I'll come to that in a while. And we all know that having these numbers, 61 in public, 39 in private, but still we all know that the learning outcomes are far less than satisfactory. Kids are not learning that well. We also know from NICE data that private schools are doing marginally well than public schools, but not that great and glorious. So if this is the situation and these are the categories of schools and categories of children and students, what we are really incurring in the system. So we have tried to map and quantify the amount that goes into the system. That also dispels something which surrounds the debates around GDPs and the percentages of budgets and all that. So in public sector, we are spending almost 1 trillion rupees in education, which is quite a big amount, I believe. But since we are not satisfied with the public schools, we tend to send our children to the private schools. So what we incur as parent, 599 billion rupees, almost 600 billion rupees in the private sector in terms of tuition fee. But still we are unsatisfied with the delivery of education even in the private schools and even in the elitist private schools. We don't have any confidence in the delivery of education in the schools. Therefore, we send our kids to the private tuition centers, what we call as shadow education, and we incur 301 billion on the private tuition. So as a parent, I am being fleeced at 2 points. One, that public sector could not deliver education for my kids, then I had to resort to the private sector. And then private sector could not deliver education and I had to resort to the private tuition, so I am spending 3.1 billion rupees. So in total, around 2 trillion rupees expenditure in Pakistan. And in terms of GDP, yes, 2.8, 1.8 or 4% of the GDP, but given the informal market size of economy in Pakistan, and given all that undocumented wealth we have in Pakistan, I think we might like to really count these numbers towards our spending on education. तो मिस्टर साहब, वो तो पैसे तो हम खर्च रहे हैं, वो बेशक जेब से जा रहे हैं या सरकार खर्च रही है या ट्यूशन्स वाले ले रहे हैं, खर्चा तो सिस्टम में बहुत बड़ा हो रहा है। 2 ट्रिलियन बहुत बड़े पैसे हैं तालीम के लिए। तो मेरा ख्याल है इसको हमें थोड़ा देखना चाहिए कि इन नंबर्स में से कोई क्या इन्फ्लुएंस निकलता है, हम उसे कैसे देख सकते हैं। मूविंग ऑन, when I think in terms of schism and fissures within education sector as a public school and a private school, I really sit and wonder whether we have a ministry and secretaries of public schools or we have ministers and secretaries for education. Because if we are about education, then we just cannot ignore the market, though I fully understand and cognizant of the fact that private sector ki regulation is a controversial issue, their learning problems, their access to credit, all that kind of value for money analysis, a fair deal in the marketplace. At least if I'm sending my kids to private school, I would like to have a fair deal of the market practices. So in case of grievance, should I go to the Security Exchange Commission against a private limited school chain? Or should I go to the local education functionary and so on and so forth? So this is a question that how, as a state, as an administration, as politicians, we are responding to education as a whole, not only for the public sector. Over the last 2 days, we have largely focused on public sector education, its dysfunctionality, why it is not working, whereas we are a little less concerned about the market actors. Yes, from the equity perspective, perhaps education is very important in public sector, but this is the reality that we cannot deny. So, what is the question for the panelists? The question is it a design issue, or we shy away touching the political economy of market actors? Is it safer education for us to stay as a consultant, as a government, as a politician, as parent with private sector and try to fix the public sector? So it's a huge political economy question I would like to put on table, that we need to think of both public and private. And when we think on that, so this image really captivates me at times. So if these two streams are not mingling up, or there is no confluence of them, so how we really going there? And that takes me to in the middle of all that depressive thing, Kipling at times come to rescue. So never the twain shall meet, or we have any semblance of political will and the administrative capacities to see that how these public-private sector would come together in such a manner that it can deliver the basic promise of education, that is that education is a social equalizer. If education is not a social equalizer, we are getting back to reinforcing the existing schism in the society, and we are sharpening the fissures in the society. So that's a serious challenge, I believe. Therefore, I thought that this overarching issue of public-private should be a moot point for us in the following time and days. So once we move on, we do understand that for the market thing, governments over decades have been able to design something to respond to marginalization through subsidies and so on and so forth. So if I think in terms of addressing marginalization by state actors giving subsidies, what comes to mind? PEF, Punjab Education Foundation, in terms of fee vouchers, other foundation-assisted schools, and so on and so forth. to a reasonable level, targeting some kind of support to those left out and marginalized areas where there should be. तो जी पंजाब में भी वो पंजाब एजुकेशन फाउंडेशन देती है, स्टाइपेंड भी देती है बच्चों को, वाउचर्स भी देती है, केपी में भी देती है, सिंध में भी देती है, वो हर जगह पे है. तो कुछ है ज़रूर कि हम सोचते हैं कि यार मार्केट एक्टर्स को इन्वॉल्व करते हैं और इनको आउटसोर्स कर देते हैं स्कूल, और ये लोग फिर तालीम देंगे और उनके रिजल्ट्स कुछ बेहतर भी हैं. लेकिन इसके साथ फिर तालीम का जो प्राइवेट सेक्टर है वो उससे काफ़ी बड़ा है. रेगुलेशंस की जब बात होगी देयर वुड बी ह्यूज पॉलिटिकल इकॉनमी अराउंड इट अगेन. बहुत से इंटरेस्ट ग्रुप्स होंगे जो चाहेंगे कि ये रेगुलेशन ना हो, कुछ चाहेंगे हो. देयरफॉर अ मोर टेक्निकल क्वेश्चन दैट how the regulation should look like. So this is about the nut and bolts of regulation. So I and Wasim sir was just having a conversation that maybe the regulation should be very lean and with a facilitative mode. Can we facilitate private sector? Can we think of some business models as a solution to the development challenge of non-performing education? Can we think in terms of providing access to credit to the low-fee schools? Can we think really in terms of impact investments and issuing bonds for the market to facilitate and then see whether they are performing in terms of learning outcomes or not? So output regulation might be a way forward where we are not concerned about their size of room, their qualifications of teachers and so on and so forth, but we are very concerned whether kids are learning or not. So we hold that criteria as a major filter to support them, facilitate them, and that's the only regulatory entry point where you can interact with the private schools. So I think for the going forward, business solutions, thinking of various corporate-like situations where market is really engaged and held responsible and accountable for their delivery is one of the very important point. When it comes to subsidies, targeting is a very central question. And I and Sham was having a conversation on our way to hotel. And he came up with a very interesting phrase. He said, yeah, our subsidies are very well targeted. I said, oh, I think they are not well targeted. And Sham was of the view that they are well targeted, they target elite very well. They are politically targeted. They are not technically targeted. So subsidies are targeted, but perhaps along political lines and not along technical reasons to target. Zebra Talim is one example in case of Punjab, and my two colleagues have been serving in Punjab big time, Fareed Saab and Sham Saab. So Zebra Talim is about giving around 6 billion in the southern districts of Punjab across the board to all girls of grade 6 and 8. So what kind of subsidy it is? We can make it very effective by just linking it with socio-economic registry-based data. And this 6 billion can serve more families and households, maybe in 26 districts, than only giving subsidy across the board to every girl, whether coming from a middle class, lower middle, whatever the quintile she's coming from, we can still ensure that it is well targeted. So that is another question that we need to think. My second last point, I'm just trying to make Freya more patient by saying second last point. So district education management becomes serious concern. So whatever the policies you have, whatever good, bad or ugly data you have, whatever सियासतदान कहते हैं कि जी ये हो जाएगा और वो पार्लियामेंट में कह देते हैं ये हो जाएगा, delivery unit would remain a district. So we know that there are constraints around decentralization and all that. But on district management, there are certain numbers which I would really like to share with this august audience. मेरा ख्याल सबको पता होगा, लेकिन अगर पंजाब का एक आप टिपिकल डिस्ट्रिक्ट देखें और मैंने मुजफ्फरगढ़ पकड़ लिया. मुजफ्फरगढ़ is about 1,300 schools, 1,300 schools, around 10,000 teachers, 200,000 beneficiaries are students, and around 1 billion rupees. What kind of manager you need for this kind of management? Had it been a private sector conglomerate, what kind of manager they would put in place who is required to manage 1300 school और 11 बिलियन या 2000 के बच्चों की इनरोलमेंट के लिए अगर कोई एक प्राइवेट स्कूलों की चेन हो तो किस किस्म का मैनेजर ढूंढ रही होगी? I think we can all relate that very quickly. But here, in this case, we are having teachers as managers. And that's a double jeopardy for the system. We lose a teacher by making him a manager, and we get a poor manager. a manager is required to do the HR functions and better planning, targeting, ensuring learning outcomes, ensuring that something great happens within the classroom, ensuring that they play well, they go to the playground, and so on and so forth. And we think that fine, a teacher who is teaching great, maybe Islamiyat or Pakistan studies is made a district education manager. That has serious implications for the management of the thing. And here, look at the tenures of the managers. This heat map will give you a feel that over the 4 years, there have been even 10 managers to certain districts. All those districts that are colored yellow, they had around 6 to 10 managers in 4 years, meaning thereby on average, 6 months at tenure. So ये इस तरह की reshuffling इतनी जल्दी होनी चाहिए नहीं होनी चाहिए. By the way, I don't want to get into serious politics at the moment, otherwise Mian Wali is red because they got 10 managers in 4 years. So what's the tenure? And we were not satisfied with this data then. We thought we need to further zoom in on this and see that what is happening. And now the slide that I'm going to show, somebody might like to identify the person who I have tried to mask. He's not there in the slide, but I believe वो कहते हैं ना कुछ चीते बैठे हैं जो ढूंढ लेंगे कौन बंदा है. Let me show you that once we started tracking a EDO, a single EDO, and in the interest of privacy, I'll not share the name. He spent 1 month in Bahawalpur, then transferred to Sialkot. He spent 5 months there, transferred to Narowal. He spent 6 months there, transferred to, again back to, I am unable to read that. Aftabad. Okay, then 4 months in another district, 1 month in another district, 7 months again in Rahim Yar Khan, and then again 7 months. So look at these numbers. These are only, ये 3.25 साल का time है total. Maybe, yeah, it is inland management tourism. So, so issue ये है ये कितना indispensable आदमी है. What a great performer he must have been कि हमने उसको 3.5 साल में 9 डिस्ट्रिक्ट करवा दिए. उसके बगैर काम ही नहीं चलता. वो जहाँ जाता है either he is a hitman for finances or whatever. So either he's an economic hitman, so to say, in want of a better word, or he's a great manager. There are only 2 possibilities. So this is a system level issue, that how we can really manage these kind of tenures. I know why I'm putting it on the table is the reasons to understand the political constraints and the binding constraints on our staff and our teams in the field. So the idea is not to embarrass anybody. The idea is that this is the binding constraint. And we are unable to retain our education manager in a district for a decent time duration where he is able to do something great. और उसके पास जाएंगे कि मैंने फाइल निकाली थी वो फिर मैं तो चला गया वहाँ से, वो फाइल फिर वहीं पड़ी होगी, तो उसका आप क्या करेंगे. तो 9 डिस्ट्रिक्ट्स इतने अरसे में रहे तो इसको कैसे देखा जा सकता है. मेरा ख्याल है इसके गिर्द एक स्ट्रॉन्ग पोलिटिकल इकोनॉमी है. दैट्स व्हाई इट हैपन्स. पॉलिटिशियंस, हैंडपिक्ड पीपल. वो जी जो डिस्ट्रिक्ट मैनेजर वो फिर लगाना तो हमने अपनी मर्जी का है ना, वैसे तो काम चलेगा नहीं, ना इलेक्शन होते हैं ना कोई और काम होता है, उसके लिए कुछ करना तो पड़ेगा हमें. अच्छा, इवन देयर हैव बीन डिबेट्स एंड डिस्कोर्सेस. केपी ने कर लिया वैसे काफ़ी हद तक कि आप एक एजुकेशन मैनेजमेंट केडर बना लें. सो इफ़ आई थिंक इन टर्म्स ऑफ पोलिटिकल इकोनॉमी, there are issues around that. There are major 3 groups. Politicians might not like to have an education management cadre because then manager would come from the cadre. Certain bureaucrats might resist, as it happened in case of KP. Then that, if the cadre is created, the cadre would also claim to be the education secretary and the director schools and so on and so forth. So there is a problem with the cadre. And then the teachers themselves, if they once get inducted in the cadre, they cannot go back in the teaching, and if they don't perform, they are captive there. So how to navigate it, I don't know. But I think these are the debates. जावेद साहब ने भी कहा ना कि मैं एक और सेमिनार फंड करता हूँ. मैं फंड तो नहीं कर सकता, लेकिन मैं विलिंग हूँ एक और सेमिनार करने के लिए. चल साढ़े तो ले लेना. And last, and I put especially this slide, assuming that Wasim Ajmal Sahab would grace the occasion, and I thought he is thickly involved in this debate about the inter-tier relations and some inconvenient conversations that we need to have. Let me really sure that we are about national education, which is beyond 4 provinces, areas, and federal government. So I would really like to create categories of federal versus national, or federal and national. So here the issue as development practitioner is how we can generate a national response to the educational challenges. Yes, that would be delivered in the provinces anyways. So we have witnessed, Priya mujhe keh rahi hain jaldi khatam karen, so I'll just skip something about single national curriculum, then of course about minimum common standards कि जी क्या standards हों जी, और जब हम minimum common standards की बात करते हैं तो ये data के standards भी हैं. PI is working on that, Pakistan Institute of Education, that has been recently revamped. Wasim Sahab is taking a lot of lead and giving time to PI. So minimum common standards are around data, around assessments, around curriculum, all that. That is a concern. But what is the inconvenient conversation which we normally shy away, and that we need to do as a politician of this country and as a practitioner of this country? That goes back to 18th constitutional amendment. That's a huge political economy. We would not like to touch that perhaps. That's a very, very inconvenient conversation, and we need to be mindful of that. There's a caution. But second thing is, what are the way forward? We understand that when this amendment was being designed, we thought that yes, this is a good idea to do away with concurrent list, but common standards and assessment must remain with the federal government, meaning thereby what is the wherewithal through which it can stay with them. Put it in the legislative list part 2. For my international colleagues, let me go in little detail for that for a while. Pakistan's constitution has different legislative list, and legislative list 2 is which is the jurisdiction of the Council of Common Interest. So if there is something that concerns all the provinces and the federal government, that should be within the Council of Common Interest. So maybe an inconvenient conversation need to be started there. Would we really like to bring assessment and minimum common standards to legislative list part 2? Maybe down the line 10 years, 20 years, 40 years, I don't know. But I think that conversations need to be cultivated, supported, and see that how various political parties resolve to handle this issue. And maybe we can produce a good technical brief for them that why it is really needed. Whether it happens or not is a big, big political economy question, so I will not go there. Then I will only flag, last slide, Freya, I will only flag 4 issues that are very high when it comes to technical political asymmetry. Decentralization of education delivery, I know it is a tough political economy, we can't touch that, even Supreme Court's injunction cannot touch that. But we have been able to design something around that, that is what we call the school-based budgeting, non-salary budgets. So at least that is one way of giving some money back to the schools, so that they are little autonomous and can play with that and see what they want to achieve with that. Vacant teaching posts. Punjab still has around 80,000 vacant vacancies at the moment. So they are approved positions, but still vacant. So how we go about that? Why they are not being recruited? Certain procedural snags, once somebody retires, then it goes for the advertisement, Public Service Commission, and so on and so forth. So vacant position even in Balochistan, I was studying that RISE paper, a couple of teachers were not provided to the newly constructed school. So SNEs are there, schedule of new expenditures are there, approved seats but not recruited. So what kind of political economy is there? Perhaps we will never be able to understand better than those guys who are on the other side of the table, and they can inform us, guide us on that. Multigrade teaching is a serious issue. Earlier there were multigrade teacher training, multigrade assessment materials, multigrade reading materials and assessments. But that all 3 things were thrown out of window because government thought that they will be providing 1 room, 1 teacher to every student, at least in case of 1 province. So we did away with that. But later on it didn't happen, and we are moving on with that multigrade. So that's a difficult issue जो हमें देखना पड़ेगा. And then of course rationalization of teacher. We all been talking about that. There are schools with oversupply of teachers, and there are schools with undersupply of teachers. But doing that rationalization on the technical side is a very simple thing. You give data to anybody in this room, they'll rationalize the teachers school-wise and enrollment-wise. But how to implement that's a huge challenge. and how to navigate all that. Thank you very much.